Sometimes love doesn't feel like love. It feels like a test, a quiet set of rules you were never told, but somehow always expected to follow. Be good, be helpful, don't upset anyone, don't ask for too much. And if you did everything right, the warmth appeared. A smile, a compliment, a moment of approval. But if you made a mistake, that warmth disappeared just as quickly. The room got colder, voices became shorter, silence replaced affection, and slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, a message formed in your mind. Love must be earned. If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. Many people grew up in environments where love felt conditional, not always intentionally, not always cruel, but conditional all the same. Imagine a child walking into a room after school. They hold up a test paper. Maybe it's a 95. For some parents, that's incredible. For others, the first question is different. What happened to the other 5 points? The child smiles less the next time. Or imagine a teenager sharing an opinion. Something honest, something vulnerable. But the reaction isn't curiosity. It's criticism. You're being dramatic. You're too sensitive. Why can't you just be grateful? So the teenager learns something subtle. Certain parts of themselves are welcome, other parts are not. And over time, the child begins editing who they are. Not consciously, but carefully. They become the version of themselves most likely to be loved. Pause for a moment. Think back. Was love in your childhood steady? Or did it seem to appear more strongly when you were useful, successful, or easy to deal with? For many people, affection wasn't absent, but it was inconsistent. Warm one day, distant the next. Praise when you succeeded, silence when you struggled. And children are incredibly sensitive to patterns. They notice quickly. If I perform well, I'm loved. If I make mistakes, something changes. So they adapt. They become responsible, helpful, polite, sometimes unusually mature for their age. Adults often praise this. What a good child. What a responsible kid. But inside, something else is happening. The child is learning to measure their worth through approval. This is where conditional love quietly reshapes the mind. Because when love feels dependent on performance, the child doesn't just try harder. They become hyper-aware, they scan reactions, they study moods, they anticipate disappointment before it even appears. And slowly, they begin to carry a silent question into every relationship. Am I still doing enough to be loved? You might see this later in adulthood, the person who apologizes constantly, even when nothing is wrong, the friend who gives endless support but struggles to ask for help, the partner who overthinks every small shift in tone, a delayed reply to a message, a slightly different expression, a quiet moment that shouldn't mean anything, but suddenly feels heavy, because somewhere deep inside, an old rule still exists. Love can disappear. But here's something important to understand. Children don't question love. They question themselves. When affection becomes unpredictable, the child rarely thinks, something is wrong with the environment. Instead, they think, something must be wrong with me. So they try harder. They become more careful, more attentive, more accommodating. They try to become someone who is easier to love. And sometimes that effort works. Teachers praise them, friends rely on them. People describe them as thoughtful, kind, emotionally intelligent. But there is a hidden cost. Because the same sensitivity that helps them understand others can make them incredibly hard on themselves. You might recognize this pattern. You help others easily, but accepting help feels uncomfortable. You reassure people, but struggle to believe reassurance when it's offered to you. You show compassion freely, but inside, a quiet voice still asks, am I too much? Or worse, am I not enough? Here's another moment to pause. Think about how you react to mistakes. Not other people's mistakes. Your own. Do you treat yourself the way you treat your friends? Or do you become far harsher? Many people raised with conditional affection develop something psychologists sometimes call an internal critic. A voice that says, you should have done better. You shouldn't have said that. You're disappointing people. That voice didn't appear out of nowhere. It was learned, slowly, quietly, from environments where love felt tied to behavior. But here's the twist that most people don't talk about. People who grew up with conditional love often become incredibly perceptive adults. They read emotional signals quickly. They sense tension before others notice. They understand subtle changes in mood. Why? Because they spent years studying reactions, trying to understand what keeps love present and what makes it disappear. That kind of awareness can become a powerful strength. Empathy, emotional intelligence, deep understanding of others. But it can also create a painful habit, believing that love must always be maintained through effort. And this is where something important begins to change. Because real love, the kind that heals rather than pressures, doesn't operate like a reward system. It doesn't appear only when you perform well. It doesn't disappear when you struggle. It stays. Even when you're messy, even when you're uncertain, even when you're not impressive. For someone who grew up with conditional affection, this kind of love can feel strange at first, almost suspicious. You might wonder, why are they still here? Why aren't they upset? Why don't I have to prove anything? Because for the first time, love isn't something you have to earn. It's something you're allowed to receive. And learning that can take time. Sometimes a lot of time. Because old patterns don't disappear overnight. But awareness is the first step. Realizing that the rules you learned about love were survival strategies, not permanent truths. The child who believed love had conditions was doing something incredibly intelligent. They were adapting, trying to protect connection in the only way they knew how. But you're not that child anymore. You're allowed to exist in relationships without performing constantly. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to make mistakes. And you're allowed to be loved on days when you are not your most impressive version. Because the truth is something many people were never told early enough. Love that disappears when you struggle was never the kind of love you deserved in the first place. And the moment you start believing that, something quiet but powerful begins to change. You stop asking, what do I need to do to be loved? And you start asking a better question. Who in my life already loves me, without conditions?